The biggest misconception about slavery is that slavery, when we talk about reparations, we're just talking about the descendants of the enslaved. Africa did not benefit from slavery. Africa was devastated by slavery. In fact, without the Islamic slave trade, there probably is no European slave trade. Europe doesn't really have new ideas, just tend to copy other ideas.
I find it insane that even trying to criticize, he's trying to criticize the West for slavery, but he says that we copied slavery from the Arabs, and this is a theme that you will see repeated over and over again. He keeps praising the Arabs for slavery while criticizing the West for slavery, which I don't really understand his motive for doing that, but he does it nonetheless.
Is in the Arab slave trade, it was predominantly about servants. So it's mostly women, it was mostly about servants, they wasn't wealth producing. Right? The money in the Arab slave trade was the traders. There's actually stories of Arab slave traders who have so much money and they have nowhere to spend it. So what claim can I make to a system that didn't produce money? The difference the difference.
Of course it produced money. I don't understand his logic. He's trying to paint it as the slaves that the Islamic slave trade had were just living the good life, were just like the housework. They were like the maids. They were just, leaving peacefully, just cleaning the house of the Arabs and just, going and fetch strawberries and pouring milk in jugs for them and like living with them and just maybe gaining their freedom by marrying the daughter or the son of the Arab who owned them. This guy he's insane.
The Western mind by the 18th and 19th century was fundamentally different in how it viewed the world to the Occidental mind.
We're actually just doing racism. We're actually just going to say racism. Our mind was better.
Well, why is that racism?
I'm just going to name a few. The Parthenon, the Colosseum, Venice. We can keep going. We can keep going on and on and on. Penicillin, the light bulb, the car, the computer. Should we carry on? Or is it self-evident? But no, our minds are exactly the same. While we were while we were developing philosophy, while we were building great statues to gods and goddesses, to knowledge, I don't know, were the Africans doing the same thing? So this, I want to choose the right words, because I want to say, is it better what we did than what Africans did? Well, of course it's better. Does that make us morally superior to them to the point where we could exert our own superiority over them? Well, no, and that's another discussion. But in terms of human achievement, well, yes, our mind is different. And that's obvious by the obvious things that we have invented and done over history that they have not. But let's carry on.
Come on, let's not play.
Fundamentally different, I said.
But different, and then it leads to great wealth. That means you're saying better.
Yes.
That's a racist idea.
Fundamentally different.
We should get a program racist ideas.
We can have a list of all the scientific and medicine discoveries that came out of Europe versus the rest of the world, if you'd like.
These are distortions of white historians that just can't accept.
That's racist. Now, that's racist.
No, it's not racist.
You're implying that a white historian is incapable of approaching the subject from an impartial perspective, which means that you must have an equally biased perspective as a black historian.
Look at the history of white.
That is extremely racist, because what he's trying to do is say, you, Rafe, as a white historian, you are not able to feel proud of anything that your civilization has achieved, because everything that your civilization has achieved is on the back of slavery. It doesn't matter what happened before slavery, let's rule that out. Everything is just because of slavery. That's the only explanation for why the West achieved so many great things. It's only slavery. And if you don't agree with that, you're racist. He's basically trying to trap you. He's trying to trap you into a logical fallacy of your own saying. So you agree that the West has done more things. Well, the West had slaves. Well, then you're a racist. It's just very simple mind trickery that he's trying to use, which obviously is not going to work on Rafe, and we can see that. But
it was so dangerous for European purchasers of slaves in Africa to go ashore that almost the entirety of the slaves who were bought in Africa were sold by Africans.
That's something that he's not addressing. the majority of slaves were sold by Africans. That's historically true, that's recorded, and that's knowingly true. What answer? He does not give a definitive answer to why that happened. There were a lot of black slave traders that benefit immensely from slavery. So were they racist against their own people? Well, again, slavery is a common thing in human history. You cannot attribute it to just one race, the white race, and that's it. That's where his logical argument completely falls into pieces, because it's impossible to attribute slavery to just one race. It just is empirically impossible through all human history.
Okay. What Europe did was a new thing. It was not.
Wasn't.
Yes, it was. No. Chattel slavery.
I'm sorry. In the Islamic slave trade, they were involved in mining, in agriculture, in irrigation.
But they also, in the Islamic slave trade, they also had rights and could be free.
You're lying to the public, though. They were on royal plantations.
Bilal, the person who does the first call for prayer in the Quran, is an enslaved African. They had rights. You could become free. And
you see what he's saying? He's saying that this is. Okay, I'm going to try to calm down. He's trying to make it seem that the Arabs, the Islamic slaves, were able to be free. They were wonderfully treated. They were amazing. It was just honey and steaks, and it was wonderful to be an Islamic slave. Why is that? Why do you try to make it appear that Islam is amazing with slaves? It's just wonderful to be an Islamic slave. It's horrible to be a slave to white people, but it's wonderful to be for Islam. What is your motivation behind that? Why are you trying to do that? It's, again, empirically obvious and historically true that slaves were slaves no matter where they were. They were slaves. They were mistreated. They were not treated like the slave masters. Why are you trying to make it appear like the Islamic slave trade was better? What is your motivation behind that?
Don't have such a rosy-coloured picture of what it was like in Africa for slaves. Just in the kingdom of Dahomey, you had annual sacrifices where you had up to 4,000 slaves murdered in human sacrifice rituals that were done there. In the Islamic slave trade, you had millions of young boys were captured. 60% of those millions of young boys died because they were castrated brutally, without anesthetic, of course, and died from that. This idea that somehow they were walking about drinking mint tulips or whatever.
Nobody said that.
Yes, you did, actually.
No, I said it was different. I didn't say it was good.
He did say it was good.
Bilal, the person who does the first call for prayer in the Quran, is an enslaved African. They had rights. You could become free. And in African slavery, in terms of what you're talking about, what was actually just said was African slavery was much more like serfdom, where you were part of the family, you had freedom at a certain time. It's actually much more comparable to serfdom than it is to chattel slavery.
He said they were able to be free and that a black slave was doing the call to prayer. And now he's all of a sudden saying, I did not say that. You see, this is what they try to do. They say one thing, and when you call them out on the lie, an obvious lie, they say, I didn't say that. That's not true. Well, thank God this was recorded.
Since Europeans arrived, because of medicine, vaccinations, antibiotics, clean water, sanitation, life expectancy doubled.
How can you deny that? How can you argue that with the Europeans arriving both in South America and in Africa, it's, again, this is stated history. This is true. In South America, they were doing sacrifices to the god of the sun, to whatever. They were dying when they were barely 30 years old. They were killing children to sacrifice to the gods. It was the Europeans that ended that in South America. Yes, they introduced disease. Yes, there was a war, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses when the Spanish arrived to South America. This makes no sense. This is empirically knowledge that anyone can access from a simple Google search. Go to ChatGPT and ask, how was life in South America before the Europeans arrived? It was death. It was continuous non-stop war. I think it was either the Aztecs or the Mayans. I think it was the Aztecs. They were continually raiding the villages outside of the empire, bringing people and doing sacrifices to the gods for it to rain. The Europeans ended that. They, like Rafe said, doubled their expectancy of life. How can you deny? I don't understand.
White supremacy is what defines the global economy. Has done since, this is a very clear argument. If you look at a map of global inequality today, GDP per capita, it will show you that the poorest part of the world is where black people live, so-called sub-Saharan Africa. The richest part of the world is where white people live, the West, and there's a hierarchy in between.
Look, since I don't care and I'm already in a big mess with all my videos, I'm just going to get into it. The global IQ averages maps perfectly into the wealth map that they just showed. So there has to be some sort of reckoning that we have in Western culture when we don't want to touch that subject, even with a 10-foot pole. Well, maybe we should. Maybe we should figure out if there's a genetic difference in IQ averages that can explain this difference. But if facts are facts, and somebody has to really do a thorough test about this, and if facts demonstrate that, then we should try to remediate it, try to fix it, accept it, go from there. I don't know what the solution is, but there has to be the conversation about how the IQ average map of the world maps perfectly with the average wealth of the world. There has to be some correlation there. It just seems implausible to me that there's no correlation whatsoever between one thing and the other.
To the person watching this, well, you've got psychosis. It's not that persuasive. Do you know what I mean?
The reason that Europe doesn't colonize Africa is it can't. It's not because it doesn't want to. It's not possible. It doesn't have the capability.
But his argument is Africa was poor before the Europeans got there.
And this is where it's simply not true. When Europe
Again, I made an allusion in the previous point. While we were building monuments, statues to knowledge, to gods, to goddesses, while we were developing philosophy, they were living in mud huts. They still live in mud huts today. How is he trying to make it seem like specific pickpockets in Africa, such as Egypt, the Islamic Empire in the Middle Ages, that's representative of the whole of Africa? That makes no logical sense. Yet still, it is what he's trying to do.
There are more books in Timbuktu, one library in Timbuktu, than there are in the whole of Europe. There's actually reports that when Columbus was sailing to America, there were Africans sailing back. Not Moors, West Africans. There's actually a lot of evidence that West Africans made it to America long before, 1,000 years.
Well, I think the evidence is plucking it out of his arse, because there is no evidence in any way you can find that Africans made the journey to South America before Columbus did. That is just that's misinformation. That is not true whatsoever. There's no recorded evidence of that anywhere in the world. Yet he's just able to spew that lie with no repercussions whatsoever in our culture to the lie that he just said. There's archaeological evidence that the Vikings did go. The Vikings were extremely experienced sailors. Okay? They had the fleet and the means to do it. The Africans didn't. I'm sorry, this guy is ignorant. This guy is straight up ignorant. He says he has a degree in psychology. Well, I don't know what university gave him any degree in anything whatsoever, ever.
So the idea that Africans are selling other Africans, again, is not really true. This is different.
Well, no, hold on. That's what this one group of Africans selling another group of Africans.
We now think of Africans, and they now think of Africans, certainly. But at the time, if there was a we are all African identity, slavery probably doesn't happen.
He's trying to excuse black Africans who sold black slaves to the Western world. He's just trying to excuse it. Well, it's just because they didn't see themselves as Africans. All of Africa didn't see itself as Africa. What kind of point is that? It's like white slaves did sell other white slaves in the past. Okay, and it's not good that they did it. It's not excusable that they did it. And no white person, no white historian would say that white slaves being sold by white people in the West was because they didn't see each other as the same tribe or the same race. He's just deflecting every blame, not taking any account, any responsibility whatsoever to what happened in the past. At some point, they will have to do it, though.
what he said. And he said that the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire were great. But don't make it out as if, there was a great Wakanda in Africa at this time. I'm sorry. These are few and far between places. I mean, the fact is, Africa was not developed. The Western mind only uses the right hemisphere for facial recognition. There are very fundamentally different ways in which these things happen.
It's just eugenics.
It's not eugenics because you now find it in places
white
like
people's
China.
mind. Listen to what you say, not the West. Let's replace West with white, because that's what you actually mean. Let's be real. White
No, I
people's
don't.
mind.
So if there's no difference in the way the Western mind works and the rest of the world, let's say, then why did we develop much faster, quicker, first, whatever you want to call it, way beyond what other cultures did? There has to be a biological difference. It cannot just be explained by the circumstantial situations that those people, there has to be a biological reason that it happened. It's just, that seems obvious to me. Again, that doesn't make you morally better. That doesn't mean you should, that doesn't give you permission to do whatever you want with other cultures, but there has to be some biological reason there. He just doesn't want to accept it. He just doesn't want to accept it because that would mean that the whole view that he has on human history, on human development, on human achievement is wrong. And obviously he doesn't want to let that go. So he will fight it with everything that he has. But it's undeniable.
Parts of the
The
world.
origin of it was white. Am I correct?
Oh, well, you're very happy to celebrate the African origins of things. Somehow Europe can't celebrate or acknowledge any of its own achievements and accomplishments.
You can celebrate the achievements, but don't pretend the Western mind is different. The white mind is different.
And cultural psychologists and anthropologists. It's very well known. This is the science.
I have a degree in psychology, so I can tell you it's not generally accepted.
Actually, it is. There's a lot of.
You talk about whiteness. It's kind of hard to extricate that from white people. It's difficult for most people, at least, listening to this, right?
If white people did the same thing, if white public figures treated blackness and no different to the way black people act, they would be demonized, they would be cancelled, they will be thrown in jail, etc., etc., etc. Yet he's able to do that with no public consequences whatsoever. He's able to just say absolutely what he wants about white people, to be blatantly racist to white people, yet nothing's going to happen to him.
And it's sort of implied within that the way whiteness operates is worse than the way other things operate, right? And
He just nodded and agreed.
And it's sort of implied within that the way whiteness operates is worse than the way other things operate, right? And
You believe whiteness makes you act badly in the world. Okay, all right. So what if we say that about black people? What if we say blackness cannot be separated from the gang violence, from violent crime, from single motherhood, from... Would a white person be able to say that about blackness? Well, he's doing the same thing about whiteness. Why can't we do that about blackness?
All right, so yeah, I'll be clear on this. No, I think when I say whiteness is an idea, and that is an idea that has come from Western Europe.
Yeah,
that is an idea that has been used to dominate the world. That was a necessary feature of doing it because Africans went to the New World and didn't do this.
Where is your evidence that Africans went to the New World and didn't do this? Please show the evidence. If you have it, show it. If you have anthropological research, if you have archaeological research, then show it, and I will agree with you. But you don't. You're just plucking it out of your fucking ass.
So yes, there is something
but they didn't
specific.
have the same technology.
Like I said, no,
they didn't have muskets and
as I said,
etc.
When Europeans came in 40, they weren't massively more technologically advanced. When Europeans came in 40, they weren't massively more technologically advanced.
He's just, I don't know. He's so ideologically captured that he cannot see the moat from the plank. That's just what I believe. Because there's no way in hell that you think that when Europeans arrived at Africa and actually went inland, that they were not technologically superior to Africans. That, I don't know. This guy just, yeah, maybe he should go back to university and get another degree, because that's, it seems that they're giving away degrees like they're popcorn to anyone that just appears in university. Oh, you come to university, here's a degree.
The more you talk about the fact that we are in this position because of other people, we need to actually depend on other people for handouts and begging, the less you take away your agency and the idea of personal responsibility. So I think the time comes when you have to start looking within your own community. What is it within our community that is stopping us from progressing and succeeding, rather than looking elsewhere? Why do we have a youth culture that celebrates violence and misogyny and homophobia, and that's openly supported? Why do we have single-parent families where the fathers aren't involved?
Slavery will actually explain some of these things.
Because this guy is completely ignorant about historical facts that are provably, demonstrably true. Yet he's in Konstantin Kisin's, a channel with almost 2 million followers spreading stupid nonsense about the history of the world. Thank you very much for watching, and like always, see you on the next one.